In this final video here in the GTO Plus series in Module 2, I'm going to be going over the remaining options available within the tool, and it'll be a little bit of a miscellaneous type video. So we'll cover the items here in the top right, I'll cover the menu items at the top of the screen, and I'm going to go through the advanced database mode that we have here in the solution. So we'll start here in the top right. There is an option here to account for card removal or not. I like to keep this on because I do want to account for card removal when I'm looking through game trees. But if you don't necessarily care about specific card removal, you can uncheck this, and you can play with this if you want and see whether you want to keep card removal on or off within the individual solutions. There's this next option which was added recently over the course of the last year or so by GTO Plus. I believe if you look at my YouTube videos, the play against the solution option was not there in 2020. And since then, they've added this functionality. Really, really cool. I covered this in PioSolver, which also has a similar new feature that they've added for this. But you can, if you have an individual solve, and in this case here, I have this Jack 9-6 two-tone board, I can actually play as either player against the solution based on that equilibrium output. So I'm going to click this, and it's going to take me into this screen, and I have the option to set up here first before I actually sit down. Do I want to play against a current tree? I actually can also play against a database, so you will see here later on in the video of me loading up a database. I could do so where I'm playing multiple hands within a database, and that's a really good way to test yourself if you have a lot of hands solved. Or in this case here, I'm only looking at one individual board, so I can actually play this specific individual board as many times as I want. I can choose whether I want to be in position, out of position, or switch. And then if you do have Flopzilla Pro and you want to export to Flopzilla Pro or connect live to Flopzilla Pro, you can do so right here as well too. And then there's some special options here, whether you want to drill a current decision or lock a specific hand for the hero. But I'm going to keep the options as they are, and I'm going to click sit down. And now I have a few more options. I can choose to go normal speed. I can show my hand histories, which will show over here. I can also show the equity of my range, and then I can have hints if I want to. So I'm going to click show equity. So this will really just show the equity of my hand against my opponent's overall range. You can choose to keep this off, which, this might be more realistic because you wouldn't actually know the equity off the top of your head. By having it here like this, if you're playing in game, you're not. It's a little bit kind of cheating because you're getting additional hints in that case there. But again, if you want to include the equity as a helpful hint for you as you're trying to navigate through a solution, you can do so. You also have this option here for no hints. If I change this here, I have this training mode, and if I have the training mode set, if I choose the wrong action, the solution is going to be shown, and then I can actually either pick another action if I want to, or stick with my original choice. And then the show solution, it'll show me what is the right option, or according to the solution, it's going to show me what's the highest EV play based on the options that I have. Sometimes there is going to be a highest EV play. Sometimes multiple options may be equal in value here too. But I'm going to turn the solution off and say no hints, and I can now actually play against the solution here. So I have pocket fours, under pair to the board. I don't have a heart. My opponent checks here in this spot. This seems like a good spot to check back. So we can just going to click check back, and what you'll see now is I can see what actually happened on the previous decision here. And so my previous decision, I chose check, which has an expectation value of 1.65, whereas betting the small size has an expectation value of 1.64, and betting the larger size has an expectation value of 1.59. So check was a better option in this case here. My opponent checks again on the turn, and the 5 doesn't improve my hand. I'm showing equity here, and doesn't necessarily improve my hand against my opponent's range. I may choose to check this again, and I'm actually going to choose a mistake here, and I think the overbet sizing is going to be a mistake. So I'm going to choose that here to show you what it looks like when you do make a mistake. And you'll see here now that the optimal play here, according to my solve, is to actually check, but when I chose this larger bet size here, it's actually the worst of all of the plays from an EV standpoint. And then finally here, we have this 8 river, and I'm in too deep. I'm going to continue bluffing and trying to get out of this hand against my opponent's hand. So I can bet this larger sizing, and my opponent does fold here. Actually, betting was the optimal play, and you can actually open this up here and look at this individual hand history, so we can see the hand history against our opponent. Our opponent here has, I'm going to hover over their cards here. Our opponent has King 9, where they called with the middle pair here on the turn. The optimal play here in this situation, again, according to this equilibrium solution, is to bet, but bet that smaller sizing on the river there. We have to turn our 4s here into a bluff. It's a better bluffing candidate here than it is to check back. We're clearly never going to win if we check back. The only really hands in our opponent's range here that we would probably win against if we checked back were those hands that may contain like the Ace of Hearts or King of Hearts, or one of those straight draw hands that maybe didn't pair up here on the river. So again, this is just a way in which we can test ourselves against this equilibrium solution. There's a few options that we have here. We can press Control here to see a solution, and I'm going to just push Control, or I can hover over this to show the solution below. We have this rounding option, so our solution can be rounded, in which case correct answers with lower frequencies will be considered incorrect. Option for you here to, if you want, depending on how precise you want to be with this scenario. I tend to turn this off in the sense that again, back to our module 1, we really can't be so precise with all of this. So in my opinion here, we shouldn't try to be precise when we're testing on this. The same hand can be put into multiple ranges pretty effectively here in this scenario here. And then the previous on will display the correct answer for your most recent decision, but you can turn this off if you don't necessarily want that instant feedback. If you want to actually go through and look at the instructions, you can click on the instructions, and again, it'll open up another option here for you to play against the solution, and I can scroll through how to actually use this functionality within GTO Plus. But again, play against the solution, really, really cool feature and really cool functionality in GTO Plus, especially when you're within database mode. Because as you can see right here, it goes on to the next hand, and now I'm back on that same exact board again. So if you're somewhat limited if you're playing against the solution for one hand, because you're only limited to playing that hand over and over and over again. But if you have a database set up with a lot of hands, you can actually test a lot of different scenarios. Maybe you want to test a formation, like a big blind defense against a button open. You can test that over and over and over again using a lot of different boards. Really, really cool way to actually dig through and test your ability to understand equilibrium outputs. And then finally, we have this session filters here where we can open this up and dig into some of those session filters that we actually have within this play against the solution function. The next option here is this navigate tree, and it's exactly what it sounds like. When I click navigate tree, it's going to show me the entire game tree in tree form, and this is just the flop it's showing me now. I'd have to move on to view turns and rivers accordingly, but what I can do here is, instead of navigating through the flop this way up at the top of the screen, I can now navigate to any node of the game tree on the flop this way. So maybe I want to look at the bet raise line and look at it from the out of position player's standpoint after leading out and getting raised, and you'll see here that it's basically blank because our out of position player is checking all of the flops. So maybe a better way of looking at this is looking at the check bet line. And in that case here, it's a check, and then our opponent bets large. We want to go to this node. I can navigate directly to that node using the tree navigation function. You'll also see here, as I'm hovering over each individual decision, I can actually see a little mini game tree pop up. So in this check line, at a high level, look at things at the hand class level, and then I see the overall grid to the right. So really cool way to get a lot of information right away by navigating through the game tree and seeing at any individual node, well, what is the range of strategic actions that my overall range of hands might take, and how those various hand classes might allocate between the various options, whether it be a check, a bet, a fold, betting different sizings, and so on. So, really cool functionality here to dig into this. If I do want to go on to turns and rivers, I can do that here. So suppose I want to look at the check functionality. Well, I can go over to wherever you see this next card, click the card, and then pick whatever turn card that I actually want here. And maybe I want to pick a 9 of clubs. And then now it'll show me the turn game tree. And you can see down here at the bottom here, I can press tab to open and close the tree navigator. I can also now go back to flops by using this arrow over here, and it'll take me back to the various flop game trees. So really, really cool way to visualize the entire game tree all at once. And when you do see a scenario where there's this green arrow here, that means we've reached the end of the game tree and they're going to deal out all of the cards, and that's when the equities get realized, or both equities of both ranges get realized in that part of the game tree. And when you see this blue minus symbol right here, that tends to happen after a fold, which just means that one player wins the pot. You can edit game trees by clicking on this little pencil icon, and it's going to take you to the screen, and what you can do is click on the import tree button, and by doing so, it's going to take you back to this exact game tree that you just saw from the navigate tree button. And here I can actually edit this specific game tree. So I can first edit action colors, and maybe I want to change the folds, the check calls, and the various bet sizing options here to different colors. And these are all RGB. So the RGB values, I can change the RGB values to associate with whatever colors that I want to for each of the individual actions. I can also edit individual decisions. So maybe I want to cut down here to only a small bet size after the out of position player checks. Well, what I would do here is I would left click this, and it's going to open up this screen where I can edit this individual decision. So I X out of this larger bet size and hit accept, and now you'll see the game tree changes. So after a check now the out of position, in position player only has the smaller bet size option. I can add bet sizes if I want here too. So maybe if I want to add a full pot size bet, I would click add action here, and I would enter a bet size. And the bet size here is going to be in chips. So the pot size here is 6.5. I want to enter 6.5, and I would hit accept. And you'll see now that the bet 6.5 option is here, which is 100% pot. Now I want to say, well, what is this going to be followed by? Because now that I've added a bet size, there's going to be a lot of other nodes that follow that particular node that I've added. So I can follow this by basic play, which includes some geometric bet sizing. I can use my current advanced settings, which is the same settings that I've already added within the game tree. Or I can follow this up by any profile that I have specifically loaded. And I just want to keep this by the current advanced settings, and I'm going to hit accept. And now it's going to add this other node of the game tree, or add this decision with the rest of the game tree all funneled out. When you're comfortable with everything here, what you would do is click accept changes, and you'd confirm, and now you'll see that the game tree will revert back to everything is being split 50-50 for the game tree. We've changed the game tree. We now need to resolve everything if we want to get a solution given this game tree. We can't just, I've opened up an existing game tree, but now that I've edited that existing game tree, the solution is no longer valid for that game tree. So again, what I'm going to have to do in this case here is, if I want the solution for this new game tree, I'm going to have to resolve everything and look at that new output, because some of those values are going to change. Anytime I change inputs, I'm going to have to look at the outputs differently, because those outputs are 100% going to change. Sometimes they won't change that much, but in many cases, even small changes in those inputs are going to change the outputs somewhat to some degree. Finally, we have this last button here, which is how to process all the files in a given folder. So if I click on this, if I have a folder and I want to process all of my GTO files within that folder, perhaps maybe you've built up a lot of different game trees within that folder and you want to solve everything, you can do so here by entering whatever target directory where those GTO files are located and processing them. So what I would do is find this target directory. I can have this option here to move those processed files into a subdirectory so that maybe I know which ones have already been solved. I can choose to whether I want to use basic storage or extensive storage for all of the files. I can use the same accuracy level for them, and I can also give up put a give up functionality in here. Maybe if some of those solves are taking overly long, I don't want the solver to continue running if it's taking more than a certain amount of time. And once I do so, if I do have a directory of GTO files and I'll enter that directory right here, I would click this refresh button and the GTO files would list down here. So if there are files down here, then this option would be available for me to process files. So I'm actually going to pull up an example where I do have GTO files in place. And I am going to paste that right here and hit refresh. And now you can see there are 2 GTO files that are in there. This is a database example that I have, and this Jack 96 two-tone board that I have. And these 2 examples are in there, and I can actually process the files if I wanted to this way, as opposed to opening up each of those individual files. Again, really, really good idea if you want to build a lot of trees and then have the solver solve them. Maybe if you're away from your computer or if you're out for the day or overnight, it's a really good way to have the solver work while you're not necessarily waiting for that solution at any given point in time. All right, so that's it for this top right portion of the window. Let's go into the advanced functionality. For this, I'm actually going to open up a new file here. I have the database mode, and I've actually already opened this up. I'm opening this new window here, and if you go back to this Run Solver option, we have Basic or the Advanced tab, and I said I'd come back to this Advanced tab. So I'm going to open up Advanced here, and what you'll see here is we have this option to activate database mode. And that's what I'm going to do here, is when I click Activate Database Mode, I now have a bunch of options. This is not going to be populated for you. I've actually already solved this for 15 files. But suppose we don't want to look at one board, we want to look at multiple boards. And that really happens a lot in data analysis when we want to start pulling things up to the macro and looking at the aggregation across a lot of different boards. Because again, there are 1,755 unique boards in the game of Hold'em. We aren't only going to face individual boards every so often. Like, we will face the same board multiple times, but you can go sessions and, depending on how often you play, weeks or even months before you see the same board again. So studying individual boards can sometimes be inefficient, and a lot of times it's a lot better for your overall study to take all of those boards, aggregate them at some level, and try to develop some findings that might be applicable over a larger set of boards. And you can do that by using database mode and mass data analysis, which we'll cover in a lot more detail in Module 6. The database mode here in GTO Plus is actually one of my favorite features in GTO Plus. It really is user-friendly, and it gives you a lot of actually analysis options within the tool itself. First, you can use some of these options to add or remove different flops to the database. So I can clear the database this way. I can add a set of random flops into the database. So in this case here, I just put a number and say add X random flops, and it would add. And I might add 10 random flops, and I can hit add X random flops, and now it added 10 random flops into the database here. I can add a specific flop. So maybe I want to add Ace of Hearts, Ace of Clubs, Ace of Diamonds, and click add. And now you'll see that flop has been added to the game tree. There's some numbers that are associated with this, and this is just how many variants of that board happen in actuality. So there are 4 ways to make ace, ace, ace boards. There are 24 ways to make a rainbow board. There are 12 ways to make a two-tone board. So there's also 12 ways to make a rainbow paired board, right? So there's a lot of different ways we can actually weight these boards as well too. The 1,755 flops, there's actually 22,100 unique flops in Texas Hold'em, but the 1,755 are the ways where we can actually simplify into strategically unique flops. I can add the current tree into the database. I can change all of these flops to something. I could update ranges, rebuild the database, or I can import them from a file. And this is where GTO Plus will have a certain subset of flops where they've curated to allow you to kind of simplify down from 1,755 boards all the way down to a subset that models the game. And they have different subsets. From what I have here loaded that are checked are the 15, this 15 subset, but they have a subset of 15, of 19, of 23, all the way up to 163 boards. And then finally, I can export flops to a file this way too. And you can even hover over these question marks, and GTO Plus will give you a little bit more functionality as to what you can and can't do here. And then finally, the option here is give up after X minutes. So as you're solving things, you can set this to give up after a period of time. Maybe if you don't necessarily want to have the solver running forever, and the solver might take over a certain amount of time on a board, it'll stop at a certain point and then move on to the next board. So what I've done here is now the check marks are going to show, this is color coded here, and there's some iconography here to show what boards are solved and what boards are not solved. So I've solved here the 15 boards that are a part of that subset. These ones that are grayed out have not been solved yet. This is what we've just recently added. There's other icons here to say whether the solve took too long based on the minutes that I've actually allocated here, whether there's not enough memory to solve that particular board, whether there's too tight of a range, whether we've actually ignored a file. So I can right click this and it will ignore all of this. And I could also add game trees that have been node locked. This is difficult to do. You'd have to actually node lock things one at a time from board to board to board to board. So it is somewhat inefficient, but it is possible to build a database using all node locks. So you can do that as well here too if you want. But once I get to a point where I'm comfortable, I have a database and I have a database that's checked, I can go into that database, which I would use by clicking on this button, which now I have, this looks somewhat familiar here, but I have options to view both players. I can view individual decision points within the tree. I can look at a specific hand, or I can look at things at the aggregate. I'm going to choose the entire range. And then I can also now, for every single board or every single individual tree, I can see some of the higher level metrics, whether they be the equity, the expectation value, and then how often each of those options are being broken out across each of the strategic frequencies for each of the individual trees. Again, really, really, really cool functionality to view as you're trying to look at this from board to board. There's also this functionality here of flop filters. So I can filter this however I like. So maybe I only want to look at two-tone boards. Well, I would just take out rainbow and three flush, and you'll see them kind of get allocated into this red section down here. And now these 9 boards that are blue are going to be averaged below, and I can only analyze just the 9 boards here. I can look at, maybe I only want to look at unpaired boards. Well, I can take out the paired and trips boards, and you'll see that these 2 paired boards are now removed from this subset, and I'm only looking at this subset of 13 unpaired boards, and any combination of those. So maybe I only want to look at unpaired rainbow boards that are king or ace high. And now of the 13 boards, there's only 2 of them that were now fit this criteria. And you can do so however you want, and I'm going to actually just hit this refresh button, and it'll take me back to the overarching screen where I can remove all of the filters here. I think it's a cool way to quickly navigate through everything. This is not what I would do if I were actually doing some detailed data analysis, but it's, again, a really, really good way to quickly navigate through your database and look at how the different boards might compare to one another. What you can do here, which is great, is if you want to take this and do some more detailed analysis in something like Excel or Tableau or another data visualization software, I can go click on this arrow again. It's going to open up this into a more text functionality, and just copy this and paste this into Excel or whatever other analysis tool that you plan on looking at the data through. Really, really cool functionality. I use this all the time. And again, you can navigate to whatever node of the game tree that you actually do so here. The one thing to note here with database mode is, and I'll go back to my database mode here again, I've chosen to look at things through basic storage. The database mode, if I wanted to process all of this, the extensive storage actually is going to take a lot, because all of these boards are now going to require extensive storage. So what this means here is that this database itself that I've solved this through is only storing flop data, which means I can't actually go and look at the turns. If I do want to look at turns through the database mode, I'm going to have to use extensive storage, which is going to take a lot more space. So just something to note as you're building out databases. Do you care about diving into turns and rivers, or is it just simply a flop analysis? And if it's simply a flop analysis, what I would suggest is use basic storage, analyze the flop that way. And if you want to go through an individual tree, you can open up that tree and then resolve it from the flop on and get the turn and river details if you want there too. The final things I'm going to go through is this top menu option here. So we'll go back to our original game tree. There's not nearly as many options here in the top menu as there are in PioSolver. I've covered really all of the basic functionality, or all of the functionality in GTO Plus within this and the last few videos. The file menu is anything about saving or opening files. So we can create a new GTO Plus file, we can open a GTO Plus file, we can save this one or save it as something else. We can convert files to basic storage. We can undo and redo things that we've done. And then GTO Plus will list the last 4 files that I've opened, and I can open them very quickly this way. There's a settings option here. So I can add and remove some settings. There's this setting here, always include no flush draw in stats. You can see down here, there's the stats that we have within the screen. If I add no flush draw, what'll happen here is now remove this. So now I've added this new screen, and now it'll add as a option here, flush draw and then no flush draw. It's just a way to have the inverse of, we always have this flush draw option here as a hand class. Now we've added no flush draw, and it's going to add an additional option here as a hand class here, which is just that inverse. We can scale small stats so they become a little bit larger. So it'll just kind of, it's more of a visual UI component here. We can add and edit notes. So by adding and editing a note here, it's a way for us to just add some additional game information. It's similar to that tree information tab in PioSolver. It's just adding some metadata in here for us to include as an additional note. Maybe we want to add some notes about a villain or a player that we've played against, or the game scenario, just to give us a little context here too. We can go to dark mode here. Again, I don't really prefer dark mode in GTO Plus. For some reason, the solvers, I like dark mode in everything except for solvers. I'm not sure why, but these solvers, I feel comfortable in light mode, but you can use dark mode here. There's this option here, when loading a save file, it checks if we have enough RAM, which is a cool way of doing so. There's this enter code box, which you can enter code. I actually didn't go through this when we were building the tree in the first place, but there's also this code option right here. If I click on this window, it's going to take me to this advanced code field, which allows me to set different options. So I can do things like setting a minimum bet size, not allowing raises below a min raise, not rounding bet sizes, etc. So just different codes that you can enter here to add some additional functionality. And then finally, importing preflop ranges, which if you do have them, you can add additional ranges through new defs 2 or new defs 3 text files. What you would do so is you would save that file in the same directory where your GTO executable file is. And you can actually use PioSolver ranges as well too. So if you have PioSolver ranges, you can put them in there. You can use this new defs 2 files, which is from the old version of Card Runners EV or Flopzilla, or the new defs 3 files, which is Flopzilla Pro versions or GTO Plus versions. And if you put that file in, just make sure that specific file name is in your gto.exe folder. And then you can either import that into a subcategory or replace your current ranges. I would highly recommend importing into a subcategory, because otherwise it's going to overwrite all of the ranges that you actually have in your solution. And when you're ready, you can import those ranges and it will bring ranges into this area over here on the right hand side. The new ranges that you've added will show up below. The help functionality will just give you some about GTO Plus. It'll give you, who this is registered to and what version that you're on. And then there's this Flopzilla Pro functionality here too, which if you do have Flopzilla Pro, you can actually integrate the two. And then the register tab is going to give you some information about your license and how to register to your GTO Plus version. So that's it for my GTO Plus walkthrough. Again, I'm going to have some videos from time to time as GTO Plus releases updates of the software. I'm definitely not going to be adding a video every single time GTO Plus pushes an update out, but from time to time I will add additional videos to keep up to date with the most recent versions of GTO Plus. But thank you for watching this, and now we'll be going into Module 3, where we really dive into the functionality of solvers and why we might be making some of the decisions that we do as we talk about building game trees. So I'll see you in Module 3, and let's start building some trees.